At first glance, Chris Watts looked like the kind of man people rarely paid attention to. He did not stand out. He did not dominate a room. He did not demand space. He blended into the background of everyday life with unsettling ease. He was quiet, polite, reliable, a devoted husband, a loving father, the neighbor who waved but never lingered, the co-worker who arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. The kind of man people described as normal, stable, and safe. He did not look like a monster, and that was the most dangerous thing about him. Because evil does not always announce itself through violence, chaos, or visible cruelty. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it hides behind routine, responsibility, and the carefully constructed image of a good life. The case of Chris Watts is not just a story about murder. It is a story about emotional emptiness, suppressed identity, psychological fragmentation, and the devastating consequences of a man who chose annihilation over accountability. This case forces us to confront an unsettling question. How does someone erase their entire family and still appear calm enough to stand before cameras, speak softly, and ask for their return on national television? To understand Chris Watts, we have to go back long before the crime itself, long before the oil tanks, long before the lies, long before the silence. We have to begin with the man he was, long before he became the man the world would finally see. Early life and the foundations of personality. Christopher Lee Watts was born on May 17, 1985 in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He grew up in what appeared to be a relatively stable working-class household. There were no widely reported incidents of abuse, extreme neglect, or early criminal behavior. On the surface, his childhood looked unremarkable. But psychology is rarely about what is visible. It is about what is internalized. By most accounts, Chris was a quiet and introverted child. He was not known for aggression, rebellion, or emotional volatility. He did not act out. He did not demand attention. Instead, he complied. He observed. He adapted. Teachers and family members described him as reserved, obedient, and eager to please. He followed rules. He avoided trouble. He learned early that approval came from compliance, not expression. From a psychological standpoint, this pattern matters deeply. Chris Watts showed early signs of a passive personality structure. He avoided confrontation. He struggled to express negative emotions. He internalized frustration rather than addressing it directly. People close to him later described him as emotionally flat, socially awkward, and unusually accommodating, especially toward authority figures and romantic partners. This is not by itself a diagnosis. Many people live their entire lives with similar traits without harming anyone. But when emotional suppression becomes a lifelong strategy, when identity is shaped entirely by external validation, and when anger is buried rather than processed, the result can be volatile. Chris learned that discomfort was something to endure quietly. Anger was something to swallow. Conflict was something to avoid at all costs. Over time, this created a man who appeared calm and controlled on the outside, but who lacked any healthy internal mechanism for releasing resentment. Instead of expressing emotion, he stored it. and stored pressure always looks for a release. Adulthood and the disappearing self. As Chris moved into adulthood, his personality structure remained consistent. He was dependable. He was steady. He was passive. He did not assert strong opinions. He did not define himself through ambition or personal goals. Instead, he attached himself to roles provided by others. This made him appear stable. It also made him invisible. Chris did not develop a strong internal sense of self. He became who he was needed to be in any given situation: son, employee, partner, later, husband and father. This flexibility can look like emotional intelligence. In reality, it often signals identity diffusion, an identity that exists only in relation to others, cannot withstand pressure. Marriage and emotional dependency. Chris met Shanann in 2010. Their relationship progressed quickly, and the dynamic between them was clear from the beginning. Shanann was extroverted, assertive, and dominant in personality. She made decisions. She set direction. She took control. Chris, in contrast, adapted. He accommodated. He followed. At first, this dynamic worked. Shanann filled the space Chris never learned how to occupy himself. She defined the relationship. He fit into it. They married in 2012. From a psychological perspective, Chris Watts did not build a shared identity within the marriage. He surrendered his identity entirely. He was a husband because Shanann defined him as one. He was a provider because the role required it. He was a father because the family structure demanded it. He did not choose these identities from internal desire. He absorbed them from expectation. The couple had 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. Later, Shanann became pregnant with their 3rd child, a son they planned to name Nico. Outwardly, the Watts family projected happiness and success. Social media portrayed smiling children, family vacations, motivational messages, and public declarations of love. But social media is not reality. It is performance. Behind the curated images were financial strain, mounting debt, chronic stress, and a growing emotional imbalance within the marriage. Chris did not voice dissatisfaction. He did not set boundaries. He did not confront problems. He absorbed everything silently, and that silence was not peace. It was pressure. The role of repression and fantasy. Repressed individuals do not release frustration gradually. They accumulate it. Over time, the mind begins to seek escape not through communication, but through fantasy. Fantasy becomes a place where responsibility dissolves. For Chris Watts, fantasy was not violent at first. It was escapist. It was internal. It was quiet. Until it wasn't. The affair and psychological awakening. In 2018, Chris Watts began an affair with a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. This relationship did not create his psychological fracture. It revealed it. With Nicole, Chris experienced something entirely new. autonomy. For the first time, he felt desired not as a role but as a person. He felt seen. He felt chosen. He began to reinvent himself. He lost weight. He exercised obsessively. He changed his routines. He imagined a life free from obligation, debt, and responsibility. This was not love. It was identity replacement. But here lies the most critical psychological point in the entire case. Chris Watts did not want a divorce. He wanted erasure. Divorce requires confrontation. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. It requires the willingness to be seen as flawed, disappointing, and responsible for pain. Chris Watts was psychologically incapable of enduring that level of discomfort. His entire personality had been built around avoidance. So instead of choosing separation, he began to fantasize about a life where his family simply did not exist. No confrontation, no explanation, no consequences, just silence. This is the moment where fantasy crossed into annihilation. The murders. In the early morning hours of August 13th, 2018, Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 daughters. The details are disturbing, but the psychology is far more chilling than the acts themselves. Chris did not kill in a sudden rage. He did not lose control. There is no evidence of an explosive emotional break. What the evidence suggests is something far colder. The murders were deliberate, methodical, emotionally detached. He strangled Shanann. He then smothered Bella and Celeste. He transported their bodies to the oil site where he worked and disposed of his daughters in oil tanks. This was not impulsive violence. This was controlled eradication. Psychologically, this indicates extreme compartmentalization. Chris Watts separated his internal emotional world from his actions entirely. He was not operating from empathy. He was operating from logistics. Solve the problem. Remove the obstacle. Restore the fantasy. After the crime, the absence of grief. In the days following the murders, Chris Watts appeared on television pleading for his family's return. He spoke softly. He smiled awkwardly. He showed minimal signs of distress. To many viewers, this behavior appeared suspicious. To psychologists, it was revealing. This was not poor acting. It was emotional emptiness. Chris Watts did not experience grief because, psychologically, he had already detached from his family long before killing them. In his mind, they were already gone. The murders were simply the final step in aligning reality with his internal narrative. When confronted by investigators, Chris lied. Then he confessed. Then he changed his story again. This was not strategy. It was identity collapse. He was not maintaining a lie. He was attempting to maintain a version of himself that could survive exposure. Psychological profile. Chris Watts does not fit the classic profile of a sadistic killer. He did not kill for pleasure. He did not seek dominance. He did not display overt psychopathic behavior in childhood. Instead, his psychological profile includes extreme emotional suppression, chronic conflict avoidance, identity diffusion, dependency on external validation, poor emotional awareness, low tolerance for stress and accountability. Chris Watts chose annihilation because he could not tolerate discomfort. He did not want to be seen as the villain in a divorce. He did not want to face shame. He did not want to disappoint others. He wanted a clean slate without consequences. And that is what makes him especially disturbing, because his motive was not hatred. It was convenience. Conclusion. The case of Chris Watts reminds us that danger does not always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks compliant. Sometimes it looks like the man next door. Chris Watts did not snap in a single moment. He unraveled slowly, silently, and invisibly. His greatest failure was not rage, jealousy, or betrayal. It was his lifelong refusal to confront his own emotions. In the end, he did not destroy his family because he wanted freedom. He destroyed them because he lacked the courage to face the truth. And that is why this case remains one of the most chilling examples of psychological collapse in modern true crime.